I tucked the soft blanket around my daughter, Sophie, as she stirred slightly in her crib. Her tiny hand clenched and unclenched before settling back into peaceful sleep. For a moment, the world felt quiet, safe. That feeling was rare these days, but whenever I looked at her, I felt grounded again, like I had something worth fighting for. Sophie had just turned 1, and every day I still marveled at how small she was and how much she had changed my life. When I first learned I was pregnant, I didn't think much about what it would mean to raise a child. I thought about tiny shoes, giggles, bedtime stories. I thought about love. What I didn't think about was how heavy the responsibility would feel when it landed squarely on my shoulders. Back then, I wasn't worried about any of it. I had Jason. He had convinced me we were ready, more than ready, to start a family. I can still hear his voice. Kids are the best motivator, Olivia. Once we have one, I'll step up. We'll do this together. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Jason was the one who wanted a baby sooner rather than later. Me. I had thought maybe we should wait, find a better apartment, save some money, maybe even let me get established as a teacher first. But Jason brushed those concerns aside with an easy laugh and an arm wrapped around my waist. Plenty of families start small. We'll make it work. Trust me, Liv, this is the perfect time. And I did trust him. I trusted him with everything. Looking back now, I realize how much I longed for a family because of how I grew up. My mom passed away when I was born, and my dad eventually remarried. His new wife, Margaret, tried at first, but after having children of her own, her attention shifted entirely to them. I became the extra, the one asked to watch over her kids, to clean up, to step aside when she needed space. My father didn't see it, or maybe he didn't want to. Either way, I learned early on how it felt to be unnecessary in your own home. Maybe that's why Jason's promises meant so much to me. He made me feel wanted, chosen. I wanted a home where I was at the center of someone's love, where my child would grow up knowing they were cherished, not pushed to the side. As I stood there that night, watching Sophie breathe softly, I thought about how naive I had been, how quickly dreams could crumble. But I also thought about how strong I had become since those dreams fell apart. Sophie didn't know any of it yet. She just knew I was her mom and I was there. That had to be enough for now. Growing up, I never really had what people call a normal family. My earliest memories are of my dad rushing out the door to work and me sitting at the kitchen table, watching the clock and waiting for someone to come home. My mom wasn't there. She never was. She died the day I was born, leaving behind nothing but a few photographs and the smell of her old perfume that lingered on one of her scarves. My dad did the best he could, but it was obvious he was drowning. That's when Margaret came into the picture. At first, she was warm and friendly, the kind of woman who seemed to genuinely enjoy the idea of having a little girl around. She brushed my hair, bought me dresses, took me on walks to the park. For a while, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe I finally had a mom. But everything shifted when she had kids of her own. First came a little sister, then a baby brother. I wanted to be happy for them, and I was. But overnight, I went from feeling included to feeling like a babysitter. Margaret was all about her own children, and my dad, well, he was too tired to notice much of anything. I became the one who picked up toys, washed dishes, and took my siblings to the park, not because I was asked, but because I knew no one else would. What I really wanted was so simple. Someone to look at me and see me. I wanted a hug that wasn't distracted or hurried, a word of encouragement that wasn't an afterthought. But most days I felt invisible, like an extra piece of furniture in my own home. So I started dreaming of escape. By the time I was 16, I knew I wouldn't stay there a day longer than I had to. I buried myself in schoolwork, took on part-time jobs, and mapped out a future where I'd never have to feel like a burden again. That's probably why Jason's attention hit me so hard when I met him later. He made me feel chosen in a way I had never experienced before. When he said, "You're all I need, Liv. We'll have our own place, our own life, our own family," I believed him with everything I had. Looking back, I realized I was carrying that little girl inside me, the one who just wanted a home filled with love and safety, and I thought Jason was the answer. I thought loving him and building a family together would erase that empty feeling from my childhood. I didn't realize then how wrong I was, how dangerous it can be to pour your whole heart into someone without making sure they're ready to hold it. By the time I turned 18, I was packed and gone. I left that house with nothing but 2 suitcases, a scholarship to a teaching program, and a determination that I would never again feel like the extra piece of someone else's life. Sarasota, Florida, became my safe haven, far enough away to breathe, but still within a day's drive if I ever needed to look back. Not that I wanted to. College was tough, but I loved it. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't know me as the stepkid, people who saw me for who I was and what I could become. I worked evenings at a small bookstore, spent my nights in the library, and convinced myself that I was building the kind of future I'd always wanted. A teaching degree, a career shaping little minds, and maybe one day, a home where love wasn't conditional. When I graduated, reality hit fast. Teaching jobs were scarce, and no one wanted to hire someone fresh out of college with no experience. Bills were piling up. So I took a job at an outdoor clothing store in a strip mall, not glamorous, but paid the rent for a tiny apartment I could finally call my own. It was at that job that I met Jason. It was late one evening, and I was wrestling with a massive box of winter jackets that needed to be hauled to the back storage area. I could barely get the thing off the ground when I heard a voice behind me. "Whoa, there, you planning to carry that yourself?" I turned and saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, with messy brown hair and the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd known him for years. Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed the box like it weighed nothing and carried it straight to the back. "Thanks," I said, brushing a strand of hair from my face, probably looking completely disheveled. "No problem," he replied, flashing that easy grin. "I'm Jason, HVAC technician by day, hero by night." I laughed despite myself. There was something warm about him, something familiar in the way he spoke. Over the next few weeks, he kept stopping by, sometimes to buy something small, other times just to say hello. Before long, we were getting coffee after my shifts, and he was telling me about his dreams. Starting his own business, building a home, having kids. "You deserve more than working yourself to the bone in a place like this," he said one night, brushing his thumb over my knuckles. "You deserve someone who's going to take care of you, someone like me." For a girl who had spent her entire childhood feeling overlooked, those words were intoxicating. Jason made me feel seen, chosen, even cherished. Within months, we were inseparable. He moved into my apartment, just for a while, he said, but soon his toothbrush and spare clothes turned into an entire dresser. At the time, it felt like my life was finally falling into place. I had a man who said he wanted a family as much as I did, and I believed we were building one together. But I couldn't have known then how quickly dreams like that can unravel. Jason proposed on a rainy Thursday evening, completely out of the blue. He'd had another argument with his mom earlier that day, something about how he needed to grow up and take responsibility for his life. I still remember him storming into our apartment, dropping his keys on the counter and blurting out, "Let's get married, Liv. Right now. Let's show everyone we're serious." It wasn't the dreamy proposal I had imagined as a little girl, but at the time I didn't care. Jason said he wanted me, and after years of feeling unwanted, that was enough. We skipped the big wedding and opted for something simple, a courthouse ceremony, a cheap dinner afterward, and a couple of selfies we sent to friends. I didn't mind. For me, the marriage was the celebration, not the event. What I wanted was a home, a family, someone who would look at me and see a future. But then there was Margaret. Jason had warned me about her. She's particular. She likes things done her way. Don't take it personally. I tried not to, but from the moment I met her, I felt like I was standing in front of a judge, not a future mother-in-law. Margaret had this way of looking at me, polite but distant, as if she were measuring me and finding me lacking. She had spent decades as a hospital administrator, and it showed in everything from the way she carried herself to the clipped tone of her voice. She was the type of woman who didn't waste time on pleasantries and certainly didn't sugarcoat her opinions. "Olivia, is it?" she asked when Jason introduced me. Her eyes flicked over my thrift store dress and the scuffed flats I had worn to work earlier that day. "And what exactly do you do?" "I'm looking for a teaching position. In the meantime, I'm working retail." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Teaching? Noble, I suppose." Jason tried to smooth things over, laughing and hugging me close, but the tension in that room was like a thick fog. I told myself it didn't matter. Margaret didn't have to love me. She just had to respect that I was Jason's wife. For a while, things were tolerable. Margaret stayed in her lane, and I stayed in mine. Jason kept promising she'll come around, Liv. She just needs time. I wanted to believe him, so I kept trying, sending holiday cards, inviting her to dinner, making polite conversation. But I always left feeling like I was intruding on something that didn't belong to me. Still, I clung to the idea that love would fix everything. Jason said he wanted kids, and I thought once we had a baby, maybe Margaret would soften, maybe she'd see me as part of the family instead of some outsider. I didn't realize it then, but I was already setting myself up for heartbreak. I kept thinking that if I gave enough, smiled enough, tried hard enough, everything would eventually fall into place. But life doesn't work like that, and marriage certainly doesn't. It happened faster than I expected. One morning, I stared at a plastic stick in my trembling hands, the tiny pink lines staring back at me like a secret I hadn't been ready to share. Pregnant. I sat on the bathroom floor for almost an hour, wondering how I felt. Excited? Scared? Probably both. Jason had always talked about having kids, about how being a dad would make him step up his game and push him to do better. So when I told him, I expected him to scoop me up, twirl me around, maybe even cry a little. Instead, he blinked a few times, then grinned nervously. "Wow, okay. That's sooner than I thought. But hey, it's great news. We'll make it work." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think this was the start of something beautiful. But almost immediately the cracks began to show. I had terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoons, and working retail on my feet all day became unbearable. My doctor warned me about stress and heavy lifting, so I quit the job, assuming Jason and I would adjust. But without my paycheck, our finances sank fast. Jason said he would pick up extra shifts, but instead he started spending more time with his friends. He claimed he needed to blow off steam, which seemed to mean late nights at bars and long weekends where I barely saw him. I remember one evening, standing in front of the mirror, my belly just starting to show. I rested a hand on it and said softly, "Your dad loves you. He's just busy." I wanted to believe that. Jason came home that night smelling of beer, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes tired. He gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and said, "Man, Liv, you're really starting to show. Better slow down on the snacks, huh?" Then he laughed like it was just a joke. I laughed too, but later, in bed, I cried quietly so he wouldn't hear me. Margaret, surprisingly, called more often. She asked about doctor's appointments and even dropped off a few bags of groceries. It was strange. Her voice had lost some of that edge whenever she talked about her grandbaby. But Jason? He just seemed distant, like fatherhood was some vague idea he could think about later. By the time I reached my third trimester, I had stopped expecting Jason to hold my hair back when I was sick or rub my aching feet. I learned to manage on my own, telling myself things would change once the baby arrived. He'd see her tiny face and something would click. He'd finally grow up, just like he promised. I was wrong, so painfully wrong. The day Sophie was born was both the most beautiful and the loneliest day of my life. Labor came early, 2 weeks before my due date, and Jason was nowhere to be found. He had told me he'd be home by 8, but midnight came and went and still no sign of him. I called 3 times before he finally picked up, his voice slurred and irritated. "What, Liv? I'm out with the guys. Can this wait?" "No, Jason, it can't. My water just broke." He stumbled into the hospital an hour later. reeking of alcohol and cheap cologne. I was too exhausted to fight, too focused on getting through the contractions, and when Sophie's tiny cry filled the room, all of it faded for a moment. I held her close, her soft skin warm against my chest, and whispered, "I've got you. I promise you'll never feel unwanted." Not like I did. Jason smiled for the pictures and even posted one on social media. Proud dad, blessed life. But that night, when I asked him to hold Sophie so I could sleep, he muttered something about being too tired and collapsed in the chair, snoring within minutes. Things didn't get better when we came home. Sophie cried a lot, colic, the pediatrician said, and I was up every 2 hours, rocking her while Jason slept in the other room with the door closed. He said he needed his rest for work. The weight of motherhood was heavy, but it wasn't just the sleepless nights. It was the emotional emptiness. I'd look at Jason and see a man who had begged me to start a family, only to vanish when reality hit. He'd disappear for long stretches, claiming over time. But his stories didn't add up. Too many nights out, too many excuses. One evening, I called him, hoping he'd pick up diapers on his way home. A woman's voice answered his phone. She laughed softly before saying hello. My stomach dropped. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. There was silence, then the line went dead. Jason came home hours later, smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. He didn't even bother lying. "Her name's Bianca," he said flatly. "She understands me, Liv. I think I love her." I stood there, clutching Sophie to my chest, unable to process what I was hearing. He wasn't even apologetic. He was free. The next day, Jason packed a bag and left. No fight, no begging, just a quick, "You'll be fine. You're strong." And just like that, I was alone with a newborn, an empty bank account, and a heart that felt shattered beyond repair. For a while, I thought I wouldn't make it. But in those dark moments, holding Sophie close, I whispered to her again and again, "I'm not going to let this break me. I promise." I didn't expect to see Margaret standing at my door 2 weeks after Jason left. We hadn't spoken much since Sophie was born, beyond the occasional polite phone call. She looked different that day, tired, thinner, like she'd been carrying something heavy of her own. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, holding a paper bag of groceries in one hand. I hesitated, unsure if this was going to be another lecture about fixing things with her son, but I stepped aside. She set the groceries on the counter, glanced at Sophie sleeping in her bassinet, and sighed. "You don't have to say anything," she said before I could speak. "I know what Jason did." Her eyes were glossy, but not with anger. There was shame there. "I told myself I raised him better than this, but I guess I didn't. And now you're paying the price." I didn't know how to respond. Margaret and I had never been close. I'd always felt like an outsider around her, like she was quietly judging me. Yet here she was, apologizing for her own son. "You and Sophie don't deserve this," she continued. "So, if you want, you can come stay with me, at least until you figure things out." For a moment, I almost said no. Pride has a way of convincing you that suffering alone is better than accepting help. But then I looked at Sophie, tiny, vulnerable, depending on me for everything, and I swallowed my pride. "Thank you," I whispered. Living with Margaret was strange at first. She had rules, routines, a structured way of running her home that felt rigid to me. But then I saw the small things, how she'd rock Sophie when my arms were too tired, how she'd make dinner and leave a plate out for me when I was late putting Sophie to sleep. Slowly, the walls between us began to fall. One night, Margaret shared something I hadn't expected. Her own story. Years ago, her husband had left her when Jason was just a toddler. "I know what it's like," she admitted quietly, "to hold her child and wonder how you're going to keep going. That's why I can't just watch you struggle." For the first time, I didn't see her as Jason's mother, but as a woman who had survived her own heartbreak. Her support didn't fix everything. Jason was still gone, the bills were still piling up, but it gave me breathing room. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, maybe Sophie, and I wouldn't have to do this alone after all. Even with Margaret's help, I knew I couldn't stay under her roof forever. She never made me feel unwelcome. But there was a look in her eyes, soft, almost maternal, that reminded me she wanted me to find my own footing. I wanted that too. So, I started searching for work that would let me take care of Sophie while still paying the bills. Teaching jobs were scarce, and I couldn't afford daycare on a starting salary. One night, while scrolling through online listings, I found an ad looking for a patient, reliable nanny for a 4-year-old boy. Flexible hours, good pay. The job was for a boy named Ethan, whose mother had passed away 2 years earlier. His father, Daniel Carter, owned a chain of car dealerships in Sarasota. According to the ad, Ethan had struggled socially since losing his mom, rarely speaking to anyone outside his family. I hesitated at first. Taking Sophie with me to work wasn't exactly professional. But when I called the number, an older woman named Helen, the family's housekeeper, answered with warmth in her voice. "Bring her along," she said. "Mr. Carter is fine with that. He just wants someone who'll be kind to Ethan." The next day, I drove to their home, an elegant Mediterranean-style house tucked behind a line of palm trees. Ethan was curled up on the couch, clutching a small stuffed elephant. He glanced at me and Sophie, then buried his face in the toy. Helen gave me an encouraging nod. "He takes time," she whispered. I knelt down a few feet from him, letting Sophie wiggle on my lap. "Hi, Ethan," I said softly. "This is Sophie. She likes elephants, too." Sophie, as if on cue, reached for the stuffed toy, giggling. Ethan peeked out from behind it, and for the first time, I saw the corners of his mouth twitch upward, just a tiny, hesitant smile. Daniel walked in soon after. I had expected someone older, maybe stern and intimidating, but he wasn't like that at all. Tall, lean, and dressed in a simple polo and jeans, he looked more like someone you'd see coaching Little League than running a business empire. "You must be Olivia," he said, offering a hand. His voice was warm but tired, the kind of tired that comes from holding a family together on your own. "Thank you for coming." We talked about schedules, expectations, and his hopes for Ethan. "He's a great kid," Daniel said, glancing toward his son, "but he hasn't opened up to anyone since it happened. I just want him to laugh again." Something about the way he said it tugged at my chest. I knew that feeling all too well. Watching someone you love shut down because of pain you couldn't erase. From that day on, I became Ethan's nanny. At first, he barely spoke to me, communicating mostly with nods and shrugs. But Sophie had a way of breaking through walls. She'd toddle over, hand him blocks or picture books, and slowly Ethan began to engage. One-word answers at first, then small conversations. Daniel noticed. One evening, as I packed Sophie's diaper bag, he said, quietly, "Whatever you're doing, it's working." I haven't seen him smile like that in years. I smiled back, feeling something shift inside me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving. I was helping someone else heal too. And in doing that, I felt myself beginning to heal as well. Working for Daniel started as just a way to pay the bills and keep Sophie with me, but it slowly became something much more. The Carter house, once quiet and heavy with unspoken grief, began to feel lighter. Ethan laughed more, especially when Sophie was around. They became inseparable, like they had known each other in another life. Daniel noticed too. He'd come home from work, loosen his tie, and stand in the doorway, watching his son and my daughter building block towers or playing with toy cars. There was always this soft expression on his face when I recognized, because I felt it too, relief. Relief that maybe we weren't as broken as we thought. Our conversations grew longer. At first, we talked about Ethan's routines, meal plans, nap schedules, but gradually it shifted. We shared little things about our lives. My love for teaching, his passion for restoring vintage cars, the awkwardness of raising children alone. One evening, after I had put Sophie and Ethan down for a nap, Daniel invited me to sit on the back patio. The Florida sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of coral and gold. He handed me a glass of sweet tea and said, quietly, "I was scared to hire anyone, you know. I thought no one could understand what Ethan needed. But you get it. And you don't just help him. You help me too. I didn't know what to say. Compliments like that always made me a little uncomfortable. But the warmth in his eyes told me it wasn't just polite gratitude. There was trust there, maybe even something deeper. The truth was, I had started to feel different too. For so long, I'd been stuck in survival mode, focusing only on diapers, bills, and how to keep my heart from breaking any further. But Daniel and Ethan, without even trying, reminded me what it felt like to breathe again, to laugh at silly things, to feel safe. Margaret noticed the change in me as well. One evening, she came to visit and watched as Daniel carried Sophie on his shoulders while Ethan tugged at my hand, begging me to come see the fort he built. Margaret smiled, a rare softness in her face. "You look happy, Olivia," she said. "I am," I admitted, for the first time in I don't even know how long. Daniel and I didn't rush anything. There were no big declarations or dramatic gestures. It was simple moments, him making dinner while I helped Ethan with a puzzle, us sharing a laugh over Sophie's messy attempt to feed herself, watching movies together after the kids were asleep. Those moments stitched something back together inside me that I didn't even realize was still broken. And Ethan, he blossomed. He started speaking more, laughing louder, even making friends at preschool. He would hug me goodbye when I left and once whispered, "Thank you for making Daddy smile again." I nearly cried right there. Somewhere along the way, we stopped being just two single parents trying to manage. We became a team and then, slowly, a family. I still had scars, memories of Jason's betrayal, of the nights I cried myself to sleep, thinking I'd failed at building a happy home. But every time I saw Sophie and Ethan curled up together on the couch, or Daniel smiling at me with that quiet gratitude in his eyes, I realized something important. Sometimes life doesn't give you the family you expect. It gives you the family you need. It had been nearly 2 years since Jason walked out of my life when my phone buzzed with his name on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Olivia," he said, his voice too casual for someone who had shattered our family. I was thinking maybe I could see Sophie, catch up, grab some coffee, like old times. Old times? I almost laughed, but something inside me, curiosity maybe, made me agree. "Fine," I said. "Tomorrow morning. The Café on Main Street." I arrived deliberately late, dressed in a soft blue blouse and jeans, nothing flashy but polished. Daniel had offered to watch Sophie and Ethan, and Margaret had winked at me before I left. "Go remind him what he lost," she'd said quietly. Through the cafe window, I saw Jason sitting at a table, leaning back like he owned the place, phone in hand. He looked different, older maybe, more tired around the eyes, but the smug smile he gave when I walked in was the same. "Liv," he said, standing to pull me into a half hug I didn't return. "Wow, you look great." "I didn't expect. That's because you didn't know me anymore," I said, sliding into the chair opposite him. He blinked, but quickly covered it with a chuckle. "Fair enough. So, how's life? I saw your Facebook, cute little family vibe going on. Is that guy the kid's soccer coach or something?" "He's my partner," I said evenly. "And yes, we're a family." Jason's smile faltered for just a second before he leaned back, crossing his arms. "Well, good for you, I guess. I just wanted to see Sophie, be a part of her life again." I studied him for a long moment. He was trying to look sincere, but I could see it, the restlessness in his eyes, the same look he used to have when he'd lie about working late. He didn't want to be a father. He wanted to feel like he hadn't failed. "Jason," I said, "finally, Sophie has a father. A real one. Someone who tucks her in every night, who shows up to her dance class and helps her build pillow forts. That man is Daniel. You gave up your place the day you walked out." His jaw tightened. "You don't have to be cruel, Olivia." "This isn't cruelty," I said softly. "It's clarity. You left us when we needed you the most. And I stopped waiting for you a long time ago." He tried to change the subject, launching into a story about his new job, his new apartment, even his new car. It was all noise to me. I realized then that I felt nothing. No anger, no longing, no sadness. Just closure. When he finally stood to leave, he gave a small shrug. You look happy, Liv. Guess that's what matters. It is, I said, standing too. And I hope one day you figure out what that means for you. I walked out of the cafe into the Florida sunshine, the warm air wrapping around me like a promise. Daniel was waiting in the car across the street, Ethan and Sophie in the back seat waving wildly through the window. I slid in next to him, and he smiled, reaching for my hand. How was it? He asked. I looked at our kids in the back, Sophie laughing as Ethan made faces at her. Exactly what I needed, I said. As we drove away, I thought about how far I'd come, from the girl who once begged for love from the wrong person to the woman who had built a life filled with it. Jason had been a chapter, one that hurt to read but taught me more than I could have imagined. And now, I was free. That evening, we all sat on the patio as the sky turned orange and pink. Margaret joined us with a plate of homemade cookies, settling into her chair with a content sigh. Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulders as Ethan and Sophie chased fireflies in the yard. For the first time in years, my heart was quiet. Not because life was perfect, nothing ever is, but because I was exactly where I was meant to be. Sometimes life takes everything you thought you wanted, burns it to the ground, and hands you something better. And if I've learned anything, it's this. Heartbreak doesn't define you. What you do after does. And I chose love. I chose family. Ich chose me.